Translation by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. In the Satya Yuga, the first millennium, all the Vedic mantras were included in one mantra, Pranava, the root of all Vedic mantras. In other words, the Atharva Veda alone was the source of all Vedic knowledge. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayan, was the only worshipable deity. There was no recommendation for worship of the demigods. Fire was one only, and the only order of life in human society was known as Hamsa. So please repeat after me. In the Satya Yuga, the first millennium, all the Vedic mantras were included in one mantra. Pranava, the root of all Vedic mantras. In other words, the Atharva Veda alone was the source of all Vedic knowledge. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayan, was the only worshipable deity. There was no recommendation for worship of the demigods. Fire was one only, and the only order of life in human society was known as Hamsa. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In Satya Yuga, there was only one Veda, not four. Later, before the beginning of Kali Yuga, this one Veda, the Atharva Veda, or some say the Yajna Veda, was divided into four: Sama, Yajna, Rig, and Atharva, for the facility of human society. In Satya Yuga, the only mantra was Omkar, Om Tat Sat. The same name Omkar is manifest in the mantra Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Unless one is a Brahmana, one cannot utter Omkar and get the desired result. But in Kali Yuga, almost everyone is a Sudra, unfit for pronouncing the Pranava, Omkar. Therefore, the Shastras have recommended the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Omkar is a mantra or Mahamantra, and Hare Krishna is also a Mahamantra. The purpose of pronouncing Omkar is to address the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. And the purpose of chanting the Hare Krishna mantra is the same. Hare, O energy of the Lord. Krishna, O Lord Krishna. Hare, O energy of the Lord. Rama, O Supreme Lord, O Supreme Enjoyer. The only worshipable Lord is Hari, who is the goal of the Vedas. Vedaischa saver aham eva vedyaha. By worshipping the demigods, one worships the different parts of the Lord, just as one might water the branches and twigs of a tree. But worshipping Narayan, the all-inclusive Supreme Personality of Godhead, is like pouring water on the root of the tree, thus supplying water to the trunk, branches, twigs, leaves, and so on. In Satya Yuga, people knew how to fulfill the necessities of life simply by worshipping Narayan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The same purpose can be served in this age of Kali by the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra as recommended in the Bhagavatam. Kirtanad eva Krishnasya mukta sangha param vrajet. Simply by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, one becomes free from the bondage of material existence and thus becomes eligible to return home, back to Godhead. Om Agyan Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Gadan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bando Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Turubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So verse again. Eka eva para veda pranava sava vanmayaha devo narayano nanya eko gnir varna eva cha. Translation. In the Satya Yuga, the first millennium, all the Vedic mantras were included in one mantra, pranava, the root of all Vedic mantras. In other words, the Atharva Veda alone was the source of all Vedic knowledge. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayan, was the only worshipable deity. There was no recommendation for worship of the demigods. Fire was one only, and the only order of life in human society was known as Hamsa. So there's quite a lot in this purport, so I'll try to extract a few points. The first one is that Srila Prabhupada mentions is about the division of the Vedas from 1 into 4. So we'll have some discussion on why that was done and the process in which it happened. Then also, we'll have a look at the mention of the Omkar, because it's mentioned in the form of the word pranava in the verse, and in the purport, Srila Prabhupada talks about Omkar. And then, obviously, the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra is mentioned very prominently in this purport by Srila Prabhupada, and he gives some meanings for the names of Hare, Krishna and Rama. And finally, the last point that Srila Prabhupada brings out is that pouring water, well, not the last point actually, but the last point that I'm going to focus on is about pouring water on the root. He's saying that Narayan is the root, and by worshipping Narayan, it's like pouring water on the root of the tree. Thus, everything, it becomes satisfied. So, why were the Vedas divided? So this is discussed very early on in the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's hinted at in the actually only the 10th verse of the Bhagavatam, where the sages of Naimisharanya, they say, Prayanalpayusha Shabya Kalavasmin Yuge Janaha Manda Sumanda Matayo Manda Bhagyahi Upajutaha. They say, O learned one, talking to Sutta Goswami, in this iron age of Kali, men have but short lives. They are quarrelsome, lazy, misguided, unlucky, and above all, always disturbed. So, this is the point, because they wanted to know, now that Lord Krishna has left the world, actually where will people get shelter? Because they no longer have Krishna directly there, and people in the coming age of Kali Yuga are going to find it very difficult to develop themselves, to perfect their lives. So in the purport to that verse, Prayanal Payusha Shabya, Srila Prabhupada explains some of the reasons why the Vedas needed to be divided up. And because he repeats that people of this age are lazy, not only materially but also spiritually. So this is our general. Unless we suffer, we're not into spiritual life. So we have to receive a few boots up the backside, and then we might become interested. In fact, that's generally the case in my life anyway. But he says that human life is actually especially meant for self-realization. So without this process of spiritual life, then actually it's a waste of time just being a human being. We might as well be an animal. He says that man should come to know what he is, what the world is, and what the supreme truth is. So, knowledge of himself, the world, and the supreme truth. And human life is a means by which the living entity can end all the miseries of the hard struggle for life in material existence, and by which he can return back home, back to Godhead, his eternal home. So, this is the goal of human life, to return home, back to Godhead. And it's actually too difficult for us in this age, who are so lacking in qualification, to achieve it through the process of just understanding the Vedas. The Vedas are very voluminous, and so therefore it's necessary that the essence be extracted from all the Vedas. So this is what we're going to discuss a little bit about, how this essence was extracted and what that essence is. One of the problems in this age, or a few of the problems, are that Srila Prabhupada suggests there's a bad system of education. Education is not educating people to be advanced spiritually, it's educating them to be advanced materially. And by being advanced materially, the tendency is that we become ignorant of spiritual matters. Because the whole point of spiritual life is actually you give up material life. In fact, in this episode of Pururava and Urvashi is just about to end. There's only one more verse, and it doesn't really explain, in the Bhagavatam, doesn't explain that much about what happened after that. It just basically, he goes to Gandharva Loka because he was worshipping or praying to the Gandharvas. But the basic point that I gather from the whole pastime is that Pururava is in fact a typical example of a conditioned soul getting bewildered. jayato vishayam pungsang teshu sangat pajayate. That while contemplating the objects of the senses, attachment develops. From attachment, lust arises, and from lust, anger arises. And then the progression goes on, that from anger, memory is bewildered, and from memory being bewildered, intelligence is lost, and then when intelligence is lost, one falls down again into the material pool. So basically he's fallen down into the material pool. And what was the reason for that? The reason was because he was focused on the wrong goal in life. He felt his senses were focused on Urvashi. Once she appeared, he became completely bewildered. He contemplated the beautiful form of Urvashi, and he couldn't get her out of his mind anymore. So basically he wasted his time, because I was just thinking, some word popped into my mind. I don't know if you know this word. She's a bit of a flippity-gibbet. Do you know what a flippity-gibbet is? You don't know what a flippity-gibbet is? It's a kind of archaic word, English word. I thought it just shows how far back I go. I'll give you the definition, because it's quite interesting. A chattering or flighty, light-headed person. That's a flippity-gibbet. It's a late Middle English origin from 1425 to 75, something like that. So, so that's the word that popped into my mind when I was thinking of Urvashi. She's a bit flighty, and she's not dedicated to Pururava, which is fair enough. You know, she's a heavenly goddess. She can do a lot better, I should have thought. So at some point she gets fed up. Why, if you're from the heavenly planets, why would you really come to this earthly planet, even though, you know, there may be some very qualified king like Pururava? So her mind is a bit flickering, she's flighty. But obviously she has great qualities. She not only has great beauty, physical beauty, which must be beyond anything that we've probably seen, at least in this lifetime. And she probably also has very wonderful qualities of speech, and she may be even very pleasant, very kind, thoughtful, all these things. She was thoughtful because she actually preached to Pururava. So he was bewildered by all this, by her opulences of beauty and attractiveness in all respects. He was bewildered by it. So he fell down into the material pool, and he had to go through many, many years of suffering. Because sometimes he would be in her company and then she would disappear. And in fact, once a year, for some time, it was just, he would see her for one day a year. I mean, that's, okay, absence makes the heart grow fonder, but this is going a bit beyond the pale, really, because, you know, if you are really attracted to something, you're not satisfied with one day a year. But, you know, she was kind of throwing a few scraps to him, just out of her kind of kindness, I suppose. So the point is really that he had focused on the wrong object. So we can compare this to, for instance, there's many other examples of those who are not flighty, light-headed, here today, gone tomorrow, like Urvashi. For instance, I was just thinking, there's another example of a marriage in the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is of Kadama Muni and Devahuti. So, Devahuti was a very highly qualified. She wasn't from the heavenly planets. No, actually, maybe she was actually. I'm not sure. But, Yeah, because she was the daughter of Manu, so he's obviously a demigod. So anyway, she was highly qualified, very beautiful, and very well brought up by Manu. So Kardama Muni was a great sage, and Kardama Muni, he actually desired to marry. But he did it in a completely different way to Pururava. Kardama Muni, he was instructed by Lord Brahma that he should populate the universe. So he should get married. So he wanted to follow his instructions from Lord Brahma. But he was a highly elevated sage, and the Lord in the heart encouraged Manu to offer his daughter Devahuti to Kardama Muni, because she wanted a husband as well. And so Manu brought her along to Kardama Muni, and he started praising Kardama Muni. You're such a great sage. And Kardama Muni also praised Manu, says, you're such a great king. And then Manu offered Devahuti to Kardama Muni, and he says, how can I refuse? She's such a qualified person. He was happy to accept her. So, right from the beginning, the marriage, the union, was auspicious, because it started off in the right way. If anything starts off in the wrong way, then it's difficult to put things right afterwards. So we need to set before even becoming attracted, like Pururava was attracted to Urvashi, we need to say, actually, how do I want to go about this process? Jai Shri Shri Radha Gokulananda ki jai. Jai Shri Shri Sitaram Lakshman Hanuman ki jai. Shri Shri Gauranitai ki jai. So it's important, if we are considering marriage or any endeavor, actually, that we think about it very carefully before we understand what is the process, how to go about it properly, and then follow that. In other words, set ourselves so that we don't get distracted. Then we are armed, so that in the future we won't just get bewildered whimsically just by the appearance of, oh, this person looks very nice or that person looks very nice. No, we should actually have it clear. I intend to go through this process, go through the Grihastha ashram in a certain way, and have it planned out. Not a whimsical thing that suddenly just happens. So this is how Kardama Muni, he was following properly, whereas Pururava and Urvashi, they just basically had a whim. They fancied each other. So that's where the problem comes in. But Kardama Muni was doing it out of duty. He did have a desire, but he was following the proper process for fulfilling his duty and also his desire. Because he did say that, actually, I desire to be married, he said to Manu. So then, after they were married, actually, they both engaged in great austerities. And Devahuti, she was not at all a flippity-gibbet. She was not flighty or light-headed at all. She served Kardama Muni, come what may, even though he was so austere. And he was performing great austerities. And she served him selflessly. And he was very impressed. And she became, actually their lifestyle was so austere that she became emaciated. So she was no longer so beautiful after a period of a long time of these austerities that they were both performing. And she was serving him with such dedication. So there she's showing a great example. She's not, okay, it's nicer in the heavenly planets. I think it's time for me to go back there just on some excuse, like, happened to see you naked when like that. No, she was prepared to serve him with complete dedication, regardless, even though it was actually suffering for her. She was a princess. She was a demigoddess. She was used to the best. But here she was serving her husband, who was a great ascetic. And he wasn't making any compromises on her behalf at this point. So at some point, Kardama Muni, he said, actually, you serve me so selflessly, so wonderfully, that what can I do for you? He wanted to please her. So this is actually how, if we selflessly serve another person, ideally, we're selflessly serving Krishna, the spiritual master, the Vaishnavas. But especially if we're in a grihastha situation, if we're selflessly serving the other person, then naturally there will be the desire on the part of the other person to fulfill the needs of their partner. So Kardama Muni, he asked Devahuti, what would you like? And she said, well, I think now it's time, actually. I'd like to have children. But, I'm emaciated now. I've just got rags on. And, and she realized, actually, I probably look horrible, with having performed so many austerities. So Kardama Muni, because he was very powerful through his austerities, he provided a wonderful mansion, it's a flying mansion. He was even amazed himself. You can read all about it, and in the third canto. And it was so opulent. And also, he provided many maidservants. I think it was 100 or something, or 1,000, I can't remember exactly. So many maidservants, and they started to bring Devahuti back to her original condition of beauty and opulence, and they dressed her very nicely, and she became once again as she was originally, so beautiful and attractive. Then they went on this flying mansion, and they enjoyed for 100 years, I think it was. And eventually, Devahuti had 9 daughters who were meant to, also very qualified daughters, who were also meant to populate the universe. And then Kardama Muni, because he'd said, actually, at some point, I must leave and go back into the forest and become a sannyasi, leave family life. So he'd already planned his grihastha life, that it would actually come to an end. Not that he was just going to enjoy indefinitely. Like Pururava, it was just like an indefinite thing. He just wanted to keep on getting Urvashi back at any cost, even just if it's only occasionally. But Kardama Muni had it all already planned out. This is how it's going to be. So I must leave. At some point I must leave. So Devahuti knew this. And so he suggested, well, I think the time has now come for me to leave. But Devahuti was a little upset, disappointed. She says, but look, you've only given me daughters. And they'll soon go and be married, and they'll leave me, and then I'll be left on my own, and you won't be here. What will happen to me? Where will I find my protection? And she'd also actually developed a desire for spiritual life. says, if you go, how am I going to fulfill my desire to go back home, back to Godhead? And so Kadama Muni said, don't worry. Soon, the Supreme Personality of Godhead will take birth in your womb, will take birth from your womb, and He will instruct you on spiritual life. So very shortly, Kapila Dev was born, and then after a short conversation between Kadama Muni and Kapila Dev, Kadama Muni left. Even though he'd actually had the Supreme Personality of Godhead appear as his son, he just left. He was so detached, actually. So he left Kapila Muni and Devahuti together. She was instructed by, and you can read very wonderful instructions given by, and some wonderful verses also spoken by Devahuti at the end of the 3rd canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So this is a complete contrast. This is like a kind of an ideal family life compared to what happened with Pururava and Urvashi. And both parties actually were following very, very carefully and strictly, not just the husband, but also Devahuti herself. And they got the result. Devahuti went and took sannyas, basically, became a renunciant again, and Devahuti received the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his instructions, and she perfected her life in this way. So this is the positive example of how family life or grihastha life can be successful. Whereas Pururava, he was deluded, it was just on a whim that he and Urvashi got together, and therefore it was nothing but suffering. And presumably, obviously the suffering mostly is given of Pururava, but I'm sure also it was some suffering for Urvashi as well. So if the basic point I'm getting from here is that if we follow carefully, then the instructions of the authorities, the Vedas, and put that into practice, plan our lives out carefully, then we can achieve all success, whether it is in the Grihastha ashram or the renounced ashram. It just requires us to be determined and perseverant. So, I've obviously completely mistimed because I was going to talk about the division of the Vedas, and that's basically just to refer to, if you read in the 1st canto, 4th chapter, which explains there about how the Vedas were divided. So I was going to go into that, but there's not time. I was also going to talk about Omkar, which literally, it's referred to here as pranava, which literally it means that which is sounded out loudly. And actually there's many references in the Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, to Om, Omkar, Om Tat Sat, Pranava, Akshara, all these things. And in one place, in the beginning of the 2nd canto, Srila Prabhupada says that actually if someone can't chant Hare Krishna, even a crazy person can chant Om. So, anyway, that's just... and then obviously there are many verses in Srimad Bhagavatam about the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Actually, I'll just quote one from the beginning and a couple from the end. So, on the 14th verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam, it's glorifying the chanting of the holy name. Appana samshritim goram yam nama vivasho grinan tata sadyo vimucheta yad bibeti svayam bayam. Living beings who are entangled in the complicated meshes of birth and death can be freed immediately by even unconsciously chanting the holy name of Lord Krishna, which is feared by fear personified. So that's right at the beginning of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Then Srila Prabhupada refers to the verse in this purport in the 12th canto, which is towards the end, well, the last canto. Kale dosha nidhe rajan asti heko mahan gunaha kirtana deva krishnasya mukta sangha param vijet. My dear king, although Kali Yuga is an ocean of faults, there is still one good quality about this age. Simply by chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, one can become free from material bondage and be promoted to the transcendental kingdom. And in the purport to that verse, Srila Prabhupada said, no, actually it's not Srila Prabhupada, of course it's his disciples who said, because it's the 12th canto. They say, it is impossible to overestimate the importance of chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare, especially in this fallen age. So I thought that was a nice sentence that Hridayananda Maharaj, Gopi Pranadana, whoever wrote. It's impossible to estimate the importance of chanting Hare Krishna, especially in this fallen age. And then the final verse of Srimad Bhagavatam actually sums it all up. It says, Nama Sankirtanam Yasya Sava Papa Pranashanam Pranamo Dukkha Shamanas Tam Namami Harim Param. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the Supreme Lord, Hari, the congregational chanting of whose holy names destroys all sinful reactions, and the offering of obeisances unto whom relieves all material suffering. So, saying the congregational chanting of the Lord's names destroy all sinful reactions. The final point I was going to elaborate on, which I won't elaborate, but is pouring water on the root. This is a well-known analogy. Prabhupada didn't quote the verse, but the verse is also, the original verse is well-known, which is Yata taro mula nisechana nena tripyanti tat skanda bujo pashakaha Pranopaharach cha yatendriyanam tataiva sarvahanam achutyeja. As pouring water on the root of a tree energizes the trunk, branches, twigs, and everything else, and as supplying food to the stomach enlivens the senses and limbs of the body, simply worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead through devotional service automatically satisfies the demigods, who are parts of that Supreme Personality. So that's from the 4th canto. It's Narada Muni instructing the Prachetas, chapter 31, verse 14. So that's in reference to Srila Prabhupada said it was in the verse actually that Narayan was the only worshipable Lord. So of course Krishna is the original Supreme Personality of Godhead. So if we just worship Krishna, then not only the roots, all the leaves, the branches, the twigs, everything, the trunk, everything becomes satisfied. So it's 8:30. If there's any questions or comments.